Why knowledge matters.
Well, first of all, thank you for providing me the forum to share about my father. I'm very proud of him, not just only as his accomplishments, but just being the great dad that he was to me. And also grateful to Solution Tree to provide me the space in the book to share who my father was and what his accomplishments were and the impact he's had not only on me, but also others. So my father, his name's Frederick Francis, and he was one of the leaders, the unsung leaders of the American civil rights for the disabled movement that happened here in the 1970s in the States. He lost his legs in a car accident in 1965, uh, driving from Brooklyn, New York to Buffalo to go and visit his girlfriend who would become my mother, and he unfortunately got in a car accident and he damaged his legs enough that they had to be amputated. Now, this is 1965, and this is a whole different world and a whole different era in how people viewed people with disabilities and treated them and regarded them. So, my father, he was naturally a questioner. He's been a questioner even before he lost his legs his whole life. He questioned not only to challenge, but also because he was curious. He was a learner. He wasn't great at school. He was a good, okay student. Uh, he was smart. He was very intelligent, but we wouldn't call them kids like him. Now we would call them basically, intelligent, but not really motivated. So when he lost his legs in a car accident and he started realizing the limitations that were out there for him as a professional and a person, he became involved in the American civil rights movement for disabled. And he did this through questioning and inquiry, because one of the things that he did was he looked at the successes and the what was unsuccessful, what would be unsuccessful sometimes with the civil rights movement for African Americans, and looking at Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and all these different leaders. And he basically guided and supported a group that he found that was called So Fed Up. It's an acronym. It stands for something long. I don't remember the whole name of it. And then he got involved with the larger civil rights movement, and led a lot of peaceful protests, a lot of what we call passive resistance, a lot of what Gandhi did, a lot of what Martin Luther King did, uh, doing basically sit-ins. There's a whole thing. In fact, there's a documentary on Netflix. It's called Crip Camp. He's in it. He doesn't talk because Crip Camp was about the civil rights movement, how it started out of as a from enrollment in a summer camp for kids who were disabled. There in the 1960s, it came from New York City, and he was not born disabled. He became disabled, but later in his career, he became a champion for disabled. Through this, he worked with vocational rehabilitation. Most of his work in New York State, and what he did was he actually developed a workforce training program for people with the disabled. He was able to convince companies that this was an untapped workforce who that companies would benefit from because they had a loyal workforce. Now, a lot of times, unfortunately, a lot of companies are very narrow in their thinking, and they didn't see how. So my father got a grant that would pay for job coaches and transportation. So this grant would go and then pay for job coaches and transportation, but they would get this loyal workforce. And it started with the throughway system, the throughway stops in New York, which was owned by the Marriott Corporation. And then the Marriott Corporation said, "Well, what else do you have?" And my father said, "Well, what else do you need?" And they were talking about how they were getting a lot of lawsuits because people were losing their hearing in the laundry rooms. And my father said, "Well, why don't you just hire the deaf?" So see how he's using questioning and inquiry, and that's what led to my father being, successful. He wasn't celebrity status. There's a lot more other people out there, like Judy Heumann, who was actually a very close friend of the family, who really became the face behind a lot of the civil rights movement for disabled. But he was really a strong motivator and catalyst in it. He was one of the framers of the American Disabilities Act. The joke I like used to say is that when parents used to come in and say you're in violation of the American Civil Disabilities Act here in the states, I would say which part. And they'd say, well, you know it by heart. And I said, well, my father was one of the framers and writers of it. It was on a computer with a word perfect floppy disk right next to me, my in my room, because I had the computer for school. So and then he retired, but he always championed the cause for disabled, and really, he was a questioner. He questioned, like I said, not just the challenge, but because he was curious, and that's what made me a questioner, because I was always asking why. I still ask why. I ask, why or how or what if. And what I realize is that when I ask questions, and sometimes we ask questions and people feel very, very on the defensive and off-putted because they think that they have to give an answer. We ask questions not to assess learning. We ask questions to activate, advance, and augment our learning. And that's something he taught me, and that's what made me a questioner as a learner, because I would question everything. I mean, I'll give you examples throughout the show. It doesn't have to be solely academic. It could just be something pops in my mind, and I'll start asking questions and want to reflect and respond to them.
Yeah, that's beautiful and so important. It really is a really nice beginning for the book, and how important it is to ask question, and also how it somehow also gets transmitted, right? Because what we model, I mean, the really basic theory of learning is really observation and then modeling, right? And so it comes a long way, and especially also for parents in general, to really model that, ask questions, and even not be afraid to not be able to answer, but just ask question, and invite children especially to ask further question, and then do ultimately their own research, as you also mentioned in the book, right? There's so many now technologies, especially AI, and also Google and other softwares that really help to forge this inquiry, that we can really help students on their way, and not just students, but also I think we are, anyways, we are lifelong learners. We are always students to some extent, of course.
And
Now,
that's the why behind questioning. And I don't think we really get into the why as much as the how or the what. Um, and the why is hard to quantify, because if you look at Simon Sinek's "Find Your Why, Start with Why," that is from your cerebral cortex. It's from your center of your brain. I think that's the part of it. I may be wrong, and if I am, I apologize. But that's another thing about questioning. You have to realize and accept you may be wrong, you may be right, like Billy Joel says. But why we ask questions and what that becomes a lot of times is because of a product of schooling. And that's what I talk about in the book, is that if you we teachers, we do three things: we present information, we provide instructions, and we pose questions primarily for assessment. My thinking with questions and questioning and inquiry is why we ask the question is to activate learning, or activate the brain, or stimulate the brain, that inquiring mind, so that we can advance and augment our learning. If I ask you a question, I do not expect you or do not require you to have the answer. I'm informing you this is what you need to reflect before responding. That's why a lot of times I see things like where I see teachers say, well, I want my kids to ask deeper questions, or I want my kids to ask better questions. No, we just want our kids to ask questions. You know, we can't just paint the Sistine Chapel without first learning how to draw a stick figure. And that's okay. And if all you can do is draw that stick figure, okay, well, that may be the depth of your questioning. It's up to me as a teacher to try to prompt and stimulate you and stimulate your deeper thinking to ask a deeper question. Do I want to require you? No, because then that's about instruction, and that's okay. But we want questioning to be natural. And if you think about when you're with a child between the age of 2 and 5. All they do is ask questions. That's why I talk about in the book, is that questioning is how adults and children communicate. And between the age of 2 and 5, that's how children communicate to adults. They ask questions. The biggest one is why. Okay, their creativity is what if, or what else, or what else could I do with it. When we go to school, two things happen. On a physiological, our frontal cortex develops to a point where our brain starts to slow down. And now we're not thinking in questions. Now we're thinking more in declaratives. That's why when in first grade, you have the student who says, I have a question. And the teacher says, well, what's your question? And they'll say, I went to McDonald's last night. That's not a question. Okay. Also, when we go to school, who's asking the questions and the purpose of the questions changes, because now you're not asking questions to activate and advance or augment your learning. Now you're primarily asking questions to assess learning. Is this everybody? No. Is it more of a larger generalization, more of the early majority and late majority and laggards? If you look at the theory of innovation with that, we're doing it. Yes. What I'm suggesting is that what we do is we ask questions to activate the learning. When I ask you a question, I am not just using that as an assessment, I am setting the instructional focus. And if I put the pronoun referring you in there, now what I'm doing is I'm personalizing your learning. It's not how is it done, why is it done? It's how do you, how can you, how could you? And we need to make questioning more of a comfortable yet a productive struggle and a creative frustration. And don't look at the word struggle and frustration, look at productive and look at creative, because everything starts with a question. What if we went to the moon? Okay. What if we could find the cure for cancer? What if there was a giant shark that terrorized a community that's known for summer vacations? How would the town respond to it? What if the sheriff of the town is afraid of the water? What if they bring in a sign? See what's movie I'm making or what book I'm making here? That's the thing. Everything starts with a question, and we need to be curious enough and courageous enough not only to address and answer the question, but also ask the question.
That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.d-ykm.com.